reality is not fixed. It flows with your awareness. Welcome to a deep dive into Seth's timeless message, sourced from excerpts of The Nature of Personal Reality.
That statement, it sounds almost like poetry, doesn't it? But the sources we're looking at today argue it's the literal truth.
The literal truth. How so?
Well, we're exploring material that reveals how our most fundamental, deeply held beliefs, especially those around, simple concepts like good and evil, they actually function as this invisible architecture.
Invisible architecture. Like shaping our world without us realizing it.
Exactly. They shape the walls of our perception, filtering all the knowledge and experience we allow ourselves to have.
Okay, let's unpack this straight away. You share these sources because, well, many of us feel overwhelmed, right? Information overload, conflicting views everywhere. So the mission today is really to cut through that noise. We're going straight to the root. How our own belief systems, personal and social, filter everything before it even gets to us.
Precisely. We're looking at what happens when human consciousness uses these binary contrasts, these opposites, to try and simplify reality.
Like black and white thinking.
Sort of, yeah. This creates what the material calls belief systems. And these systems severely limit the universe, really, by dictating whose is in grace and who is in a state of loss of grace.
Grace, like divine favor.
In a sense, the sources lay out three major systems built on these pretty arbitrary distinctions.
Okay, let's dive into the first one. The sources call it System 1. The preferred attributes sounds like the societal gold standard.
Yeah, these are the markers of grace, the standards of moral superiority that many Western societies historically clung to, often without even thinking about it.
And the source lists them out.
It does. It's presented as stark binaries. Health versus disease, wealth versus poverty, white versus black, Christian versus non-Christian. And the common thread here is that these preferred attributes define who's morally superior based on external, kind of arbitrary labels.
Oh, and the sources also note that male usually gets added to that preferred list too.
Right. So if you tick all those boxes, Christian, male, white, wealthy, healthy, what's a payoff according to this system?
You view yourself as fundamentally guiltless. Simple as that.
Yeah.
But the source immediately warns that you're standing on a very unstable foundation.
Unstable. Why? Because it's based on externals.
Exactly. And what's fascinating is the psychological consequence this framework dictates. It often gets disguised as like spiritual policy.
How so? Give me an example.
Okay, take poverty. If you believe wealth is a sign of God's favor, well, then poverty must be a sign of divine disfavor, right?
That seems, well, incredibly self-serving, frankly. Does the source suggest this leads people to just wash their hands of it?
It absolutely does. It suggests this leads to non-interference, a kind of spiritual justification for apathy, you could say.
So people might say they feel sorry for the poor, but deep down, the belief is that the disadvantaged are inherently lower caste because they lack God's favor. So the internal logic becomes, let God handle it, don't interfere.
Okay, so that's System 1, the sort of classical establishment view. But then the sources present System 2, which is the complete opposite.
A complete reversal, yeah.
Yeah.
The counter contrast, here, grace is found in the other side of those binaries.
So like what?
Like brown skin versus white skin, Indian or Eastern ways of thinking versus American, and being deeply understanding of mystical things versus unfeeling coldness.
Interesting. So in this system, whiteness and wealth aren't just neutral, they're actually seen as bad.
Right. Signs of moral decay or spiritual corruption even. Poverty isn't just okay, it can become a source of pride, proof of spiritual refinement almost.
But isn't that just as rigid? Just flipping the labels?
That's exactly the point the source makes. Both systems, despite being opposites, are equally psychologically unstable because they rely on this rigidity based on external labels.
And this creates problems for individuals caught in them.
Huge problems, massive internal dilemmas. The material gives this example of, say, a wealthy white person who holds System 2 beliefs.
Okay.
They feel fundamentally flawed because of their background. They might desperately try to appear open-minded, maybe by displaying ethnic symbols, idols or beads.
Trying to compensate?
Exactly, trying to compensate while internally struggling with their own inherited identity. They're basically at war with themselves over these arbitrary labels.
Wow. Okay, so those first two systems, 1 and 2, they deal with things like race, wealth, background. Things where you might, I guess, choose who you associate with to some extent. But the sources say there's one belief system that eventually traps everyone, and that's about time itself, Old age versus youth.
Yes, this is the big one. The classic, almost inescapable cultural story. You peak in your 20s, maybe 30s, and then it's just downhill from there.
The long, slow slide into irrelevance.
Pretty much. The dominant belief is that life is a decline. So the elderly get characterized by decay, losing their minds, spiritual ignorance, all that.
Yeah. But the sources argue against this. They offer something different.
Radically different, a kind of new gerontology, you could call it, which flips this whole narrative of decline completely upside down. It talks about acceleration.
Acceleration, how?
What's fascinating here is that the text argues aging actually triggers a natural acceleration of spirit and mind, much like, say, adolescence triggers physical and emotional changes.
So, as the body slows down, the mind speeds up.
In a specific way, yes. When physical time is nearing its end, the sources say a great creative surge happens, a release of abilities, specifically influencing the right hemisphere of the brain, the intuitive creative side.
That's a powerful idea, a final creative peak almost.
Yeah.
But wait, if society sees aging as decline, wouldn't that inner experience be misinterpreted?
And that is precisely the trap the source describes, because the societal belief demands that old age must equal decline.
Right.
This creative expansion, this increased awareness and intuition, it gets labeled as senility or mental decay or some old age disease.
So it's dismissed, or even worse.
Often suppressed, maybe with medication. Denying the individual what the source calls one of the most creatively potent and valuable phases of their entire existence, it's a huge, culturally sanctioned loss.
Okay, so these belief systems create boundaries based on race, wealth, age. But the sources suggest the most fundamental belief that locks us in is even more personal. It's the split between our conscious and unconscious experience.
Yes, the waking state and the dreaming state.
How does that connect to the social prejudices we were just talking about?
Well, the source draws a really powerful, the potentially controversial analogy here. It connects those social prejudices directly to this fundamental psychological split within us.
Go on.
The text states that, in Western thinking especially, white gets equated with the conscious mind, rational, youthful, active, the whole work ethic thing.
Okay.
And conversely, black gets equated with the unconscious, the primitive, old age, death itself, seen as lazy, chaotic, even threatening.
It's crucial we understand here, the text isn't making literal claims about races, is it? It's using these loaded social concepts as metaphors for an internal psychological division.
Absolutely critical point, yes. The sources are reporting on the fear of the unconscious self, that spontaneous primitive part holding our deep emotions, our chaos, and how this internal fear gets projected outward.
So the darkness we fear inside gets put onto perceived others.
Exactly. In this analogy, onto the black race, who are described as simultaneously oppressed, yet also much pampered as children, a really complex, problematic projection stemming from that internal fear.
So this is the core mechanism, the source says, of the Western psychological split. We fear the depths of our own minds.
We fear our own depth.
So the ultimate goal, then, is to break down that internal barrier, to learn to trust the unconscious.
That seems to be the core message, and the sources offer an incredibly practical, almost surprisingly simple step for doing this.
Which is?
Radically changing your sleep pattern.
Sleep. How does sleep fix this deep psychological split?
Well, the material argues that our standard long 8-hour-plus sleep periods actually create an artificial deep division between the conscious and unconscious mind.
How? By making the separation too clean, too long.
Exactly. When you plunge into one state unconsciousness for such a long, unbroken stretch, you establish this unhealthy rigidity, a hard border.
Okay, so what's the alternative? What's the specific recommendation?
The recommendation is shorter periods. Aim for 4 to 6 hours of continuous, stable sleep, but supplement that with short naps as needed throughout the day or night.
Naps, like polyphasic sleep. And why does that work better?
The benefit is profound, according to the source. You end up frequently waking up right at the point when consciousness and the unconscious meet most perfectly, that threshold state.
So instead of a hard crash across the border, you get more of a gentle fusion.
A gentle fusion, exactly. That transition period is where the clarity and memory of the waking mind can actually grasp and retain the meaningful insights, the data, from the dream experience.
I see. So you don't just forget it all instantly.
Right. It leads to greater stability, the source says, and an expanded sense of awareness overall. Your conscious mind keeps its clarity because it isn't just, completely knocked out for 8 hours straight.
And you mentioned older people often naturally fall into this pattern.
Yes, the source notes that, and it's explicitly suggested as ideal for creative work and achieving greater mental stability.
Okay, that makes sense. So if that barrier between conscious and unconscious is what locks us into a fixed, limited reality,
Yeah.
what happens internally if we don't change, if we keep that wall up?
If we maintain that wall, yeah, and cling to that belief that the unconscious, our emotions, our dreams, is somehow dangerous or dark.
What are the consequences then?
The sources are pretty clear. This belief that emotions are dangerous leads directly to suppressing feelings, not just while you're awake, but crucially, while you're dreaming too.
Suppressing dreams, how?
By not valuing them, by dismissing them, by
Yeah.
training yourself to forget them. And this suppression creates a massive energy blockage.
A blockage. Leading to what?
This blockage is what often manifests as neurosis or other mental disturbances, because the natural healing data, the vital information in those dreams, is being consistently missed or ignored.
So suppressing our own inner darkness or spontaneity doesn't make it go away. It just bottles it up.
It bottles it up and then it gets projected. It supercharges that energy and directs it outward. That's the classic projection mechanism right there.
Ah, okay. So you project the things you fear in yourself onto others.
Precisely. Chaos, uncontrolled sexuality, aggression, whatever you repress. You project it onto external enemies. That could be nations on a global scale or locally onto other races, other creeds.
So if you believe, say, sex is evil,
You project that onto groups you think represent primitive or uncontrolled behavior. You basically need those external monsters to justify your own internal repression.
wow. So the way out then, the path to a less rigid reality, is to remove the need for that projection by facing the inner stuff.
Seems so. When the conscious and unconscious blend more naturally through things like the suggested sleep changes, but also changing the beliefs about the unconscious, the individual gains more self-trust, more clarity.
And the scary stuff, the darkness.
The frightening qualities of the unconscious start to fade, the source suggests. When you stop fearing the unknown within you, the spontaneity, the raw emotion, it stops being a threat.
And becomes.
It transforms into a source of great light and power, actually. Rather than something that needs constant policing or projecting onto the world, you achieve what the sources call a greater stability of being.
This deep dive has really shown, hasn't it, that our reality genuinely seems to flow with our awareness.
It really has.
We've seen how these deeply embedded social beliefs about race, wealth, age, and even something as personal as how long we sleep can make our reality feel so rigid.
Creating these artificial boundaries that we then spend so much energy defending.
Yeah, defending against parts of ourselves, ultimately.
And the goal, according to this source material, isn't necessarily to just abandon all these opposing values, good, bad, light, dark. It's more about unifying them.
Unifying. Finding the connection.
Finding the natural, stable connection between them. Between waking and sleeping, conscious and unconscious. When you stop being afraid of your own energy, when you start to trust your fundamental nature as good.
Then you don't need to project fear anymore.
Exactly. You stop needing to project your fears and limitations onto the world around you.
So a final thought for you, the listener. You're invited, really, to experiment. Maybe with your sleep patterns, maybe just by observing your own beliefs about these contrasts.
Yeah, what happens to your personal reality when you start to allow that so-called dark side of your consciousness, your dreams, your intuition to become an illuminating partner?
What new knowledge, what new awareness flows in when that wall between your conscious self and your deeper shadow self finally starts to dissolve? Something to think about.